Darius Coleman wasn't the kind of man who liked unnecessary attention. He worked from home, kept his yard neat, and only ever spoke to his neighbors when necessary. For the most part, people left him alone, which was exactly how he liked it. That was until one simple decision put him under a microscope. It all started on a Thursday afternoon in Crestwood, Missouri. Darius had just wrapped up a long morning of work and decided to take a break by checking his internet speed. Lately, his Wi-Fi had been acting up, slower than usual, buffering on video calls, lagging when he streamed music. At first, he thought it was just his provider being unreliable, but something didn't sit right with him. So, he dug a little deeper, opening up his router settings on his phone. He noticed a device connected to his network that he didn't recognize. The name wasn't just random numbers and letters. It looked like someone had intentionally labeled it Crestwood 01. That was weird. Darius lived alone. He didn't have multiple devices connected to his Wi-Fi beyond his phone, laptop, and TV. He wasn't the type to lend out his password either. So who was using his internet? Annoyed, he decided to kick every unknown device off the network and reset his password. He stepped outside for a stronger signal, leaning against the side of his house while typing in the new credentials. And that's when Melanie Foster saw him from her kitchen window. She spotted Darius standing in his driveway, staring at his phone, his fingers moving quickly across the screen. To her, it looked suspicious. She had never trusted him, not for any real reason, but because he never seemed interested in being part of the neighborhood. He didn't come to block parties. He barely spoke to anyone. And now, here he was, standing outside, messing with something on his phone. Her mind jumped to the worst conclusion: he was hacking. She didn't know what or why, but she felt it in her gut. Something wasn't right. Before she could talk herself out of it, she grabbed her phone and dialed 911. Yes. I need to report something suspicious. My neighbor. He's outside doing something with his phone. I don't know what it is, but it looks off. Can you send someone to check it out? The dispatcher asked a few questions, but Melanie didn't have real answers. She just kept repeating the same thing. He's up to something. I just know it. The police were on their way, and Darius. He had no idea his quiet afternoon was about to turn into a full-blown investigation. Darius had just finished updating his Wi-Fi password when he heard the sirens. At first, he barely paid attention. Maybe they were headed somewhere else. But then he saw the squad car slowed down and stop right in front of his house. Two officers stepped out. One was a tall, broad-shouldered man with sharp features, Detective Louis Navarro. His partner, Officer Belle Carter, had a more compact frame but carried herself with quiet authority. Darius let out a slow breath. Here we go. He didn't move from his spot as the officers approached. Navarro's hand rested near his belt, not on his gun, but close enough to send a message. Sir, Navarro called out, voice steady. We got a call about some suspicious activity. Mind telling us what you're doing? Darius frowned, glancing between the officers. Suspicious activity? He was standing in his own driveway. I'm changing my Wi-Fi password. His tone carried a hint of confusion, but he kept his voice calm. He knew how these things could escalate. Navarro exchanged a quick glance with Carter before looking back at Darius. Do you live here? Darius almost laughed. What kind of question was that? His car was in the driveway. His name was on the mailbox. Yeah, he said, crossing his arms. I've lived here for 3 years. Before Navarro could respond, a voice cut through the air. He's lying. Darius turned. And there she was. Melanie Foster stood on her porch, arms folded, watching everything like she was the neighborhood security guard. He's always outside doing something, she continued, messing with his phone, looking around like he's watching people. Now he's out here standing in the same spot for 10 minutes. Just tapping away. Darius couldn't believe it. Was she serious? I was on my router settings, he said flatly. Because someone I don't know has been using my Wi-Fi. Melanie scoffed. Oh sure, and I'm. Navarro turned to her. Ma'am, do you have any evidence that Mr. Coleman has done something illegal? Melanie hesitated because, of course. She didn't. She just had a bad feeling. I don't know. She admitted. I just think you should check. Navarro exhaled. His patience thinning. He turned back to Darius. Sir, would you mind if we take a quick look at your router settings? Just to clear this up. Darius clenched his jaw. He shouldn't have to prove anything. But he also knew how these situations could spiral out of control. Fine, he muttered, unlocking his phone and pulling up the settings. Here, take a look. Navarro leaned in, eyes scanning the list of connected devices. And that's when his expression changed. Because there it was, Crestwood I-01. Who owns that device? Navarro asked. Darius shook his head. Not me. Officer Carter stepped in. Eyebrows raised. So someone's been using your Wi-Fi without permission? Darius nodded. And I don't think they were just stealing internet. Look at the connection logs. It's been running non-stop. Someone's been watching. Navarro's posture shifted. This wasn't just a petty neighbor dispute anymore. Melanie, still standing on her porch, suddenly looked uncomfortable. Wait, what do you mean, watching? Darius turned to her. His eyes cold. I mean someone has been spying. And they might be watching all of us. But the real question was, whose silence settled over the front yard. The weight of Darius's words hanging in the air. Melanie, who had been so sure she was in the right, suddenly looked uneasy. Spying. That wasn't what she expected to hear. Navarro straightened up. His voice more serious now. Let's get inside. I want to see exactly what we're dealing with. Darius didn't argue. He led the officers into his house, his frustration simmering just below the surface. He hadn't done anything wrong. Yet here he was, being treated like a suspect in his own home. Melanie hesitated before following. She wasn't sure why, but something told her she needed to hear this once inside. Darius placed his phone on the dining table and mirrored the router settings onto his laptop screen. The device list appeared. There it was again, Crestwood I-01. Still connected, still active. Officer Carter leaned in, scanning the details. Can you see what kind of device this is? Darius clicked around, his fingers moving fast. I can't tell exactly, but... He opened the activity logs and froze. Navarro noticed the shift in his face. What is it? Darius's throat went dry. It's been accessing camera feeds. The room went dead quiet. Melanie blinked. I don't understand. What camera feeds? Darius's fingers hovered over the keyboard. Mine. He turned the laptop around. My home security cameras. Someone's been logging in and watching my live feeds. Carter's expression tightened. You're saying someone has been spying on you through your own security system? Darius exhaled sharply. That's exactly what I'm saying, but then his stomach dropped. Because the more he scrolled, the more he realized, it wasn't just his cameras. His system had flagged multiple IP addresses. Some of them belonged to his network, but others, different homes. Oh, this is bad, Darius murmured. Navarro leaned closer. What do you mean? Darius tapped the screen. Whoever this is, they're not just watching me. They're watching other people in the neighborhood. Melanie took a step back, shaking her head. No, that can't be right. Darius turned to her. You sure about that? He clicked another log. A new feed opened. A dimly lit hallway. Then a living room. Then a bedroom. Melanie gasped. Wait, that's... Darius didn't even have to ask. He recognized it immediately. "It's your house." She stumbled backward. Pressing a hand to her mouth, Navarro's voice was sharp. "How the hell is this happening?" Darius gritted his teeth. "If I had to guess, someone in the neighborhood set up a fake network. A Wi-Fi signal that looks like a normal connection. People unknowingly connect to it. And once they do, their devices get compromised." Carter's face darkened. "You mean a man-in-the-middle attack?" Darius nodded. "Exactly." Melanie's voice shook. "So you're saying someone's been, what? Watching me? My family?" Darius's eyes didn't leave hers. "That's exactly what I'm saying." She sank into a chair, her hands trembling. "Oh my God." Navarro's jaw tightened. "All right, we need to figure out who's behind this. And fast." But what none of them knew was that the person responsible was a lot closer than they thought. Detective Navarro wasted no time. He pulled out his radio and called in for cyber support. "This is bigger than we thought," he muttered to Officer Carter. "If someone's running a surveillance network, they're not just invading privacy, they're committing a felony." Carter nodded, her expression serious. "And if we don't stop them now, who knows how far they've already gone?" Darius, still seated at his laptop, was already digging deeper. He wasn't a hacker, but he knew enough about network security to trace where the data was being sent. He opened the IP logs and froze. "Wait. This can't be right." Navarro looked up. "What?" Darius turned the laptop screen so they could see. "The data isn't going to some random server. It's being sent to an address right here in the neighborhood." Melanie's eyes widened. "You mean someone close by is behind this?" Darius nodded. "It's coming from a house just a few doors down." Navarro's expression darkened. "Can you pinpoint exactly which one?" Darius worked fast, cross-referencing connection timestamps with signal strength. Within minutes, he had a match. His stomach dropped. He recognized the address. Melanie did too. "No," she whispered. Shaking her head, Darius cut her off, his voice cold. "That's Brandon's house. Brandon Foster, Melanie's own nephew, a 22-year-old college student who had moved in with her a few months ago. He was quiet, always on his computer, barely socialized. Now, suddenly, things were making a whole lot of sense." Melanie's face went pale. No, that doesn't make any sense. Brandon isn't. He wouldn't." Carter stepped in. "We need to talk to him. Now." Melanie hesitated. She didn't want to believe it. But deep down, something in her gut told her it was true. "I'll take you to him," she murmured. Darius stood. "I'm coming too." Navarro gave him a sharp look. "No, you stay here. Let us handle this." Darius clenched his jaw. He hated sitting back when he was the one who uncovered everything. But he also knew pushing back wouldn't help. "Fine," he muttered. "But you'd better get the truth out of him." But the truth? It was even worse than they imagined. Melanie's hands shook as she led Navarro and Carter down the street to her house. Every step felt heavier than the last. Brandon, the kid she had taken in, the one she helped through school, it couldn't be him. And yet, deep down, a voice in her head whispered, "What if it is?" She opened the front door, calling out, "Brandon, can you come downstairs for a minute?" No answer. Navarro exchanged a look with Carter before stepping inside. "We're going up." Melanie didn't argue. She just wrapped her arms around herself, her breath unsteady. They climbed the stairs, reaching Brandon's bedroom door. It was shut. No sounds inside. Navarro knocked hard. "Brandon, this is the police. We need to talk." Still nothing. Then, the sound of movement, a chair scraping. Footsteps. Carter's hand hovered over her gun. "Open the door. Now." Slowly, the knob turned. The door creaked open, revealing Brandon Foster. He looked startled, nervous, his eyes darting between Navarro, Carter, and his aunt. His hands fidgeted at his sides. "What's going on?" he asked. His voice tight. Navarro studied him. "We have reason to believe you've been accessing private security cameras in the neighborhood." "You want to explain that?" Brandon's face barely flinched, but his fingers curled slightly, like he was gripping something invisible. "What? That's crazy," he scoffed. "I don't know what you're talking about." Carter wasn't buying it. "Mind if we check your laptop?" His jaw tightened. "You don't have a warrant." Navarro stepped closer. "Brandon, we can get one, but right now, we're giving you a chance to tell us the truth before this gets worse." A long, tense beat. Then Brandon exhaled. "Look, He ran a hand through his hair. "I wasn't doing anything illegal." "Okay, Navarro cut him off. "Then why is your IP address linked to a network breach involving multiple homes?" Brandon froze. Melanie's voice broke. "Brandon, please tell me you're not involved in this." His eyes darted to her. And for the first time, his mask cracked. "I didn't mean for it to get this far," he muttered. "It started as a joke. I wanted to see if I could get into someone's Wi-Fi. Just to mess with them." Navarro's voice was sharp. "So you admit you hacked into the network?" Brandon hesitated. Then he nodded. Melanie's breath caught in her throat. Brandon kept going, his voice faster now. "It was just supposed to be a prank. But then I saw the security cameras, and I got curious." Carter's eyes narrowed. "Curious or obsessed?" Brandon didn't answer. Navarro's patience ran out. "How many people?" "Have you watched Silence?" Then his voice dropped. "I don't know." Melanie staggered back. "Oh my God." Brandon looked at her. For the first time, real regret crossed his face. "I swear I wasn't hurting anyone," he said. Navarro didn't let him finish. "Brandon Foster, you're under arrest for unauthorized access of a computer network and unlawful surveillance." Brandon went pale. "Wait, no." Carter was already pulling out her cuffs. Melanie turned away, covering her face as tears welled in her eyes. Darius had been right all along. And the worst part? She had called the cops on him when the real danger had been inside her house the whole time. But this wasn't over yet. Brandon didn't resist. He stood there, wrists bound in cuffs, staring at the floor as Navarro read him his rights. It was over. Melanie's breath was shaky. She couldn't even look at him. This was her nephew, the boy she had taken in, fed, supported, and he had been violating the privacy of their entire neighborhood. Navarro guided Brandon toward the door. But before stepping out, he turned to Darius, who had been watching from the sidewalk. "You were right," Navarro admitted. "If you hadn't caught this, we might have never known." Darius didn't say anything at first. He just let out a slow breath, looking between Brandon and Melanie. Then finally, he spoke. "You know what's crazy?" His voice was calm, but the weight behind it was unmistakable. "I was out here minding my business, changing my own Wi-Fi password, and yet somehow I was the one who got the cops called on me." Melanie flinched. She had no defense, because there was none. I was wrong," she murmured. "I made an assumption, and it was completely unfair." Darius let that sit in the air for a moment. Then, shaking his head, he turned toward his house. "I don't need an apology," he said over his shoulder. "Just do better." And with that, he went inside. Navarro and Carter exchanged a look before leading Brandon toward the patrol car. Melanie stayed behind, standing alone in the middle of the street. The truth had been right in front of her all along, but she had been too busy looking at the wrong person. And that mistake, it would haunt her for a long time. Assumptions have consequences. Jumping to conclusions based on bias or paranoia can ruin innocent people's lives while the real danger goes unchecked. Instead of making judgments without evidence, take a step back, observe, listen, The truth might not be what you expect if you found this story eye-opening. Share it. You never know who needs to hear this lesson today.